Now, I know that thus far I've been just using specifically movies and TV shows as a focal point and reference point as examples for what it is I'm talking about. And that's mainly because I feel like a visual representation would be the best representation to showcase the intricate details that I'm trying to explain. But when you look at stories as a whole, it's all forms of media. It's books, it's magazine articles, it's movies, TV shows, video games, songs even. And this concept of the 3-act structure in a scene-by-scene basis is found in... Okay, songs, articles, maybe not as much, but it's found almost anywhere. Some more mundane than others, but some really good examples of what I just talked about in books specifically would come from Star Wars, Heir to the Empire, the first book in the Thrawn trilogy, and the Murder of Roger Ackroyd, one of the Hercule Poirot books, and I know I botched that name, but... In Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, there is a scene about midway through the book where Luke comes across a bunch of Imperial Star Destroyers. It's a 4 to 5 page sequence where he gets discovered. They try to lock their tractor beams on him. He maneuvers in and out of the way. Eventually, he gets like 2 or 3 Imperial Star Destroyers locking their tractor beams on him. So he pulls off this insane trick, and it succeeds, and he escapes. That's the whole scene. We get important elements of the story. There's a theme progression in terms of the scale of the Imperials versus Luke specifically. We get a plot progression where what happens in the scene directly impacts the rest of the story moving forward. And it sets up Luke meeting new characters. It sets up the Imperials' plans are drastically changing and how they react to the immediate incident. Sets up several character development themes. I'm trying to avoid spoilers. If you haven't read the Thrawn trilogy and you love Star Wars, do yourself a favor. But it sets up character development for both the reaction to what happened as well as Luke's character, where he's still trusting the Force to do these really crazy techniques, and it builds up and showcases his skill as a pilot and how much he's matured since the original trilogy. It has the scene sequel aspect of it as well, where the scene is Luke coming into view of the Imperial Star Destroyers, and they figure out who he is and they try to trap him, and then the ending with the failure of he can't escape because he's ultimately locked on. So then the sequel aspect comes from him realizing, okay, well, I can try this 1 in a billion shot trick to get out, or I'm gonna get captured by the Imperials, and he does it. It works, and he gets free. And that can be broken down even further, where for the remaining of the chapter is another 4 to 5 pages, where the scene aspect is that entire sequence of events, and the sequel aspect is the remainder of the chapter where it shows how the Imperials are reacting to what just happened. And then, of course, that's the 3-act structure as well. Introduction, Luke stumbles upon Star Destroyers. Incite an incident, Star Destroyers realize he's there. Raising of the stakes. He's trying to maneuver around the tractor beam. Climax, he gets caught for good. Resolution of the climax, he breaks free. And falling action, he escapes. 3-act structure, condensed and summarized into a 4 to 5 page sequence. And in the other example, Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, there's a sequence in the second chapter that is actually really interesting in how they handle this approach. The entire second chapter, it's like a 6-page chapter, I believe, all with the exception of like the last page and a half, is a giant info dump. It's how everyone in the town relates to each other, back history, backstory on Roger Ackroyd and why all that's important, and it helps build up an understanding of the environment in which the story takes place. And that is a one giant info expositional dump. But as you're reading the chapter, what is revealed is that all that information is actually the thought process of the main character as he's going about his day walking the streets. And so suddenly it goes from an expositional dump to just a guy's thought because of what happened in the first chapter triggered a train of, oh, this guy relates to this person, blah, 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 blah. I wonder how this person reacts or is reacting to things. And of course, those elements are highlighted a bit specifically for the reader's benefit. But at the end of the day, that exposition dump is just a thought process of the main character, and a logical one that makes sense to the character in context to the rest of the story. And then as the scene's going on, he has this thought process, and then he runs into Roger Ackroyd. And Roger Ackroyd is, freaking out over something, and he's like, I gotta talk to you, we gotta talk. The main character is like, oh my god, does it have something to do with your son? No, my son is away. He's not here right now, but I need to talk to you. So this air of conversation happens, and then a third character walks in on the conversation and tries to be a little nosy Nancy, and that's when Roger Ackroyd just ends the conversation, says, meet me later, and walks away. And the main character is questioned by the third party, and he just blows her off and then walks away. And that's the actual scene. The main character walking on the streets, runs into Roger Ackroyd, they have a conversation, someone comes and interrupts the conversation, and they all part ways. And what this does is, again, it's the expositional dump that is just the thought process as the main character is walking through the streets. It's a slight character development. It's a very brief chapter and a very brief conversation, so we don't get a full character development, but we do see how they react to each other. Like, we see the third party is a nosy Nancy. We see that both Roger Ackroyd and the main character don't really want anything to do with her, so they both blow her off. We see that Roger Ackroyd and the main character are good friends, which is why Roger Ackroyd is so, desperately in need to talk to him. We get plot development because the main character is now set up to go to Roger Ackroyd's house. If that's not talked about in the book, there would have been no reason to bring it up in the first place. So that sets up how the plot's going to then transpire. And then we get thematic elements. Why is Roger Ackroyd freaking out? Why is the son called into question or any slight concern? Why is the third party trying to be, nosy? And that helps set up the thematical element. It has the scene sequel aspect of it, where the scene is the guy just walking around thinking to himself, bumps into Roger Ackroyd, wants to know what's going on, but that goal of figuring out what's going on is interrupted by this third person coming in and just being nosy. And then the sequel aspect is Roger Ackroyd going away and the character trying to blow off the third party. And then that's the 3-act structure as well. Very simplified, very short. So then, what at the end of the day makes up a scene? Because a thought process, a minor interaction, technically speaking, a scene is a continuous sequence of events that are held within the same time and place. And it can be as simple as a conversation in a room. It can be as complex as a battle. And technically speaking, based on that definition, movies that are meant to look like one shot or a one location setup could be considered one giant scene, such as Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. Because when we look at the scene, it is all from the viewpoint of one character in one room, and that's it. Nothing changes from beginning to end of the movie. The character doesn't really change much. The location doesn't change much. His viewpoint doesn't change. And the entire movie is set up to be him just being voyeuristic on his neighbors with some interesting elements scattered throughout. And the only changes to the movie are broken down in a sub-scene structure where the day-night cycle and the major plot beats are what ultimately will breaks the movie up into sub-scenes. But from beginning to end, it's technically one giant scene if you take all of that out. And there are many short stories and short films that will take place either as a conversation in a single room or location, as a driving sequence from point A to point B where the two characters are arguing. And a great example of that would be Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. Every sequence of events is just one scene that has a compelling 3-act structure driven story that's all interwoven into a overarching plot line that is a greater 3-act structure. 4 rooms, that is 4 to 5 separate sequences, all containing the full 3-act structure, all compressed within one location, that are strung together to make a larger story. And then that's just breaking it down on a small aspect, whether it is a one-shot, one-scene location that is the entire story, or it's multiple short stories compiled together to form a larger, bigger picture. Those stories or those sequences and scenes are still A, scenes, and B, stories that use the entire 3-act structure. But then on a grander scale, you get movies like Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, where the entire movie is comprised of only a handful of scenes, and those being the major battle sequences. Because every sequence has all 3 acts, it has the action-reaction, that is the scene, and sequel. It has the major developmental points, and it is those moments throughout the movie that end up advancing the movie forward. But they're all individual scenes, and they all use the 3-act structure. It's just compartmentalized and broken up by the different characters' viewpoints, so that the audience is getting a newer, fresher look at everything that's going on. In the written aspect of that, books like Brandon Sanderson's A Way of Kings have major battle moments. And battles are just an easy way to explain this, because what's interesting about The Way of Kings is that there are several battles that take place over the course of several chapters, but every chapter is broken up into a different character's viewpoint. So even though everything is happening at the same exact time in the same exact location, it is a continuous sequence of events. By having that fresh look perspective, we are able to further divide the giant scene of the battle into the scenes and sequences of the chapters, which is then further subdivided into the moments and plot beats that those characters and choices those characters make, which then further decreases the size of the scene. But overall, those 4 or 5 chapters is one giant scene, because it's one continuous battle that takes place throughout, story-wise, half a day, and book-wise, 4 or 5 chapters. And because the technical definition of a scene drastically impacts what it is, it really doesn't matter if at the end of the day you're writing a scene that's 3 sentences, yes, that's possible, or 3 chapters. As long as you keep it compelling and engaging while moving the plot forward, while engaging all these elements so that the reader or an audience member feels like something is happening and that they should be paying attention to it, even if it's on a subconscious level, that will help drive the story forward. Again, stories don't have to follow this 3-act structure, so scenes don't need to follow the 3-act structure. But as long as you keep it engaging, compelling, entertaining, exciting, make it something the reader wants to pay attention to, even if they're not actively paying attention, that's what's going to make the scene work. That's how they're going to go through the story and remember it on both the large scale and the small scale. And that's what makes certain moments in both books and movies and even video games very memorable. So thank you so much for watching this. I hope to see you on the next video, and until then, stay imaginative. Have a good night.